This is a clip from the latest episode of the Game Football podcast from The Times. To listen to the full show, go to wherever you get your podcasts. After an exciting game last night, we have the reporter Pete Rutzler covering the big game for The Times. Pete, good morning.
Hello, how are we doing? You can hear me loud and clear, I hope. Otherwise, we're in a bit of trouble. But yeah, all good.
Yeah, we can hear you okay. The clattering and banging around in the background of the Parisians having their morning coffees and croissants. But we're here to talk to you about the big game. I just want your initial assessment because it was absolutely crazy. It was great fun. But I just want to you bring us back down to earth. Was this a fair result for PSG? Deserved to win? Or did City really cock this up again?
No, I think it was a very fair result, to be honest. I think even the first half, it felt like PSG just had a little bit more control in the game. I obviously scored and the goal was ruled out, Hakimi's goal in the first half. But I suppose the difference, it just felt like that City might have that bit more nous, those sort of penalty area smarts that PSG seem to lack. They still have that kind of bluntness, and I suppose that's been one of the main narratives of PSG this season, around their number 9 and their lack thereof. There's a nice contrast with City having Haaland, who's just on a 10-year deal. But what you did get the feeling of, especially at the start of the game, was that PSG were just, in very simple terms, quicker, sharper, a bit more zip to them. I know that's kind of playing into what we've talked a bit about with City this season a lot. I mean, this was the first time I'd actually seen City live, I think, for a few months. And it was really quite striking just how much more sluggish they were. And I turned to Paul Hurst, who was with me and doing the report for The Times as well. And it felt like when City were out of possession and they were in their 4-4-2 in their shape, you'd look at mainly De Bruyne and Haaland up top. And I would just sort of get these sort of, not flashbacks, but thinking how similar in a way they were to how PSG looked a couple of years ago when they had Mbappe and Messi, particularly at the latter end of that season in 2022-23, just not doing as much off the ball. Now, the difference, obviously, is that with City, they're trying. It's just that they just didn't have the same intensity. I think that's exactly what Pep Guardiola was talking about full time. And then in the second half, I think we saw something we haven't really seen from PSG, probably at all, for more than statistically for more than a decade. They haven't come from 2 goals down to win a game since 2012. Never in the Champions League. But it just once they went 2-0 down, rather than the customary sort of PSG folding. This morning the L'Equipe and the French media having their usual, digesting how it's gone wrong again and why it's gone wrong so early. You actually had a real response, a show of resolve and resilience, a collective, inspired moment, really. And I think for Luis Enrique, it's the kind of game that he can use to take his project to the next level, because that second half performance was unbelievable from PSG. I think they scored 5 times, didn't they? One of them was ruled out. It was 16 shots to none as well. I saw that this morning, which is just in that period after City went 2-0 up, it was quite the reaction.
Yeah, an amazing performance from PSG. You mentioned in that analysis there, talking about what Pep Guardiola was talking about after the game. So often these big nights in the Champions League where City have imploded, as the back page of the Times headline says, Guardiola has been part of that implosion. What was he like after the game? Talking about kind of lacking aggression in midfield was one of his explanations for this game. But how did he seem in the press conferences after the game?
Yeah, I didn't get the sense of a sort of he was at a loss to explain it or anything like. It was more like he was. I mean, he says we have to accept it, and it was kind of like he sort of resigned to it, as if there wasn't a sense of this has happened. I could see how this has happened. We're going to have to address it. And we've seen that, really, haven't we, in terms of what City are doing in the transfer market. And without saying what the issues were that we could all see, I mean, as you said, he mentioned that PSG were more aggressive, they were faster. He didn't say the other bit, which was, we are slower, we aren't as intense. This is why these moments are happening. I saw that Jack Grealish was a bit more at a loss to explain it, talking about confidence and things like that. But it did fundamentally come down to, a level of intensity really that they couldn't really match PSG. It just, I think we talk about the age of the team. Like PSG do have a very young squad. That's what they've done. They've completely overhauled their squad. But it was so apparent during the game, and I got the sense that Guardiola was just kind of accepting of that. He sort of rounded it off as well by saying, if we go out of the Champions League, well, we deserve it. It's it wasn't like there was. You didn't get the palpable frustration or the palpable anger. It's kind of this is where we are now, and it was no surprise really.
Yeah, Pete Rutzler, thank you very much for joining us on the game. We'll let you get back to your croissants and coffee when we'll get into some analysis in the studio. We'll hope to speak to you soon. Thanks, Pete.
Nice one. Cheers, guys.
Well, there we are, chaps. A little bit crackly analysis from Pete Rutzler from that cafe in Paris. We're hoping to pick up all his expert analysis from the game last night. But thank God we've got Johnny Northcroft and Gregor Robertson with me in the studio to back him up. Johnny, Pete was talking about the first thing I think that is important here when we're analysing it from a City point of view, that PSG did deserve to win this game. They were the better team overall. That was Pete's assessment. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%, yeah. They battered them really. Certainly after City went 2-0 up, they battered them. But they were the superior in the first half, could have gone ahead by half-time. They outpassed them quite significantly, created better chances, had the energy of youth that Pete's talking about. I thought he made a really good point that it was like City were like that old PSG team, where you know they're great players, but you also know that they can't run anymore and there's something missing and they're there for the taking, and they've got a kind of softness about them if you put them under pressure. And fair play to PSG, the way they've rebuilt and sort of got this new quote unquote project underway with properly talented young players, properly good players.
We're excited about Barcola, aren't we?
Barcola was great last night, wasn't he? He's still a bit rough around the edges, but he looks like they surprised when he scored.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's a good finish by me.
Yeah.
But now they've got some really, really interesting players, and Enrique he's having a bit of a kind of second coming as a coach there as well, sustaining that project. So they look like they're going in one direction. And City, I just think, it was a lesson about scoreboard journalism, because there's been a kind of idea that City are back because they've won some games.
Yeah.
And then you
beat Ipswich 6-0 and
they beat
things like
Salford. Whoa. Beat a rubbish West Ham team, and they squeaked past Leicester. And, the only really, really decent team they played in that run was Brentford, who should have beaten them, could have beaten them. So City are a long way. And we know this. It doesn't, the first half of the season hasn't lied to us, and that was confirmation last night.
I'd be slightly inclined to say the same thing. Like, let's not go overboard at PSG either. Got to look at the only teams they'd beaten before this were Salzburg and Girona. They remember
so they're both crap.
No, remember the conversation.
They've only beaten City.
Remember the conversation after the Arsenal game, which
yeah.
wasn't that long ago. It was like, look at this faded force. Who are they? Where are they going? That's not that long ago. Then they drew with PSV at home. They lost to Atletico Madrid at home, and who else? Lost to Bayern. You can do that. So, yes, this was a big performance, and it was a big step forward. But City weren't losing to one of the contenders for the competition. That arguably makes it worse for City.
Yeah.
This is not PSG of old.
We are talking about a battle between the teams in 22nd and 25th in this new Champions League format, which will come
still
to.
Need a draw to go to qualify for the qualification stage. Whatever, it's confusing now.
But then coming on to your point about that makes it worse for City, that if you're not necessarily in the camp of like, wow, PSG looked good, PSG looked exciting. I'm not saying you're not that far, but you make an interesting point, and a very valid one, that PSG aren't this super talented top of the table type side.
They're developing side.
But they're all 21 years old. So
yes, so there's excitement.
You can make a case for being up and down,
right,
in form.
Right. But what do we think then about the City implosion again, though? Then what do we think about that? I was watching this, and it's so remarkable the way they just seem to all start looking at each other in such desperation.
The camera cutaways to like Gundogan looking around at other people and sort of.
It's a bit like the Spider-Man
half-heartedly waving his hand somewhere or saying, who was marking him?
Yeah.
You know, like,
wait, I thought it was you. That Spider-Man meme where they're pointing at each other and going, hang on, I thought it was you. For the third goal, the cross comes all the way in. Yeah. And it was like they were a lot watching this cross going and going, that's not mine. Someone else is getting that. Someone else is getting, no one's getting it. It's just all the way to the back post. Do you have any explanation for that? Is it this confidence point that you've made before? How do we rationalise this in big games? These are the guys that won the treble.
I mean, in a way, it's simple. They're really poor against the ball these days, and they're still quite good with the ball. And the little upturn has been because De Bruyne is back and Foden's hit some form, and Savinho and Doc have been doing quite well. So going forward, the goals have come back. They've looked like City in those flashes, but against the ball, either in midfield, either pressing or just basically defensively. You know, they've got Núñez playing right back, bless him. Actually looked brilliant when he was carrying the ball forward, but defensively...
The nutmeg was sort of lame, wasn't it?
Yeah,
really?
It was. Yeah.
But really, really hard for him.
And
hard for anyone, but particularly someone playing out of position against Parc.
Yeah, difficult. And I mean, John Stones comes on and makes it worse. Ruben Dias gets injured. I mean,
Kovacic and De Bruyne came off, Gundogan, McAtee, and I don't think McAtee touched the ball. Everything's just going on around them. Like, part of it does come back to if they had to bring off De Bruyne really at 70 minutes, I think. Kovacic was getting run around as well. They don't really have many other options at this moment in time, which is why we see them making moves in the transfer market. Yeah, absolutely, and we'll come on to that in just a second. But we talked recently about the other sides start looking at City now and going, they're not up to much this lot. But is it now that they're because I was looking at this team last night and then the bench and going, not actually very good, are they? I wouldn't have any of these players, etc. But is it that's maybe got into their own psyche now as well? They don't think they're as good anymore as they once thought they were.
Teams get on a death spiral, don't they? Man United have been on it for years, where there's been so many traumas that once you get a little setback in a game, that sense of fatalism and vulnerability comes in to the players. But look, if I was playing against City, I'd still be very wary of them when they've got possession and when they're in your third. I mean, they're still capable of absolute top class football there. But I would think if I can withstand that, you can just get at these guys so easily in so many different ways.
And he collapsed against Sporting.
Yeah.
Collapsed against Feyenoord dramatically. Really passive in the second half against Juventus. That was quite comfortable as well. Like, it's always going to naturally be in the back of their mind. That's just the Champions League. We're not even talking about Premier League games there. It's going to be in the back of your mind, even when they go 2-0 up, that like, have we got it within us to see this out? And I think you can see that. They once the first goal went in, they were really inhibited. There was no belief really. Yeah. I don't think it kind of looked like the belief drained away from them.
That stat that Pete came up with, that PSG had 16 shots to, was it 1 or none?
None. 26-9 in the whole game. I think 16-9 in the second half.
In the second half. I mean, given the attacking riches City have got, to not even land a blow and to be sort of taken all at the other end does show the way they're going psychologically as well.
Yeah, last night was the 9th time that City have failed to win a game in which they were ahead in all competitions this season, which is the most of any Premier League club this season. Just thinking about that and some of the Pete's points about Pep Guardiola, is he going to last these 2 years, Johnny? We're going to bring in some of the signings in a minute. Omar Mamouche, the latest one. There is clearly a desire for a rebuild there. There's a rebuild happening. They're signing young players, Kusanov, the defender. This is where it's heading. But for a manager who he feels it so personally, so deeply, as we've talked about before, I mean, he's starting to show some of the signs and some of the characteristics that Jurgen Klopp talked about when he said, I cannot do this to myself anymore. What do we think about that idea that he signed this contract and it's not got better since then? I think I even introed that idea on this podcast, that he signed the contract. What an uplift that will be for Pep and for his players and for the club. And it's not getting any better.
No, it's not, and he feels it deeply. But I hope he does, because this is what we've always wanted to see. Can Pep build a team from scratch? I look at the signings, and they're not signings for this season or even next. No. These are like 5 years time signings, or 3 years. Like 3 years when they start to come at their peak, and then you win in 5 years with these guys. They're doing what I guess Real Madrid did back in the day when they signed Vinny Jr. and Rodrigo and those types of signings, but they're not doing it with an already winning team. So that's and then Viana's coming in as sporting director. I'm not entirely clear if these are signings influenced by him or they're still Cheeky Begiristan signings. So there is a long-term project being started there, and you'd assume that at this point in time, Pep intends to see it through. But there does come a point where it drains you, and a manager has to walk away. And I like the fight in him. I do like the fight in him. He's not blaming anyone else for this. He wants to try and do it. But I don't sense he's the kind of guy that's going to sit there getting beaten week after week after week for a long time. Because he'll say, I need to go for the good of the club. I think he's that type.
Yeah. Do we think there's also a case of, I'm thinking back to, we were talking before the show about the Sir Alex Ferguson documentary that's on at the minute and that you're a part of, and thinking about those kind of rebirths that he had at Manchester United that sometimes took a season where they would finish third and not win a trophy or whatever, and then they would come back again. Thinking about other areas of help that you'd get, an experienced coach, bring in another number two. We're talking about Begiristain leaving and things. He looks quite isolated to me, Pep, in these things. That as much as you're praising him, Johnny, for saying he's taking it all on, in taking it all on, you make it all about yourself. It's all on me. It's all on me.
Yeah, and there is a comparison with Klopp in that he's built his own empire. He's become such a powerful king, as it were, that he's become the big voice. And that happened to Klopp at the end of his reign, where people like Michael Edwards had left, and some of the checks and balances around him had gone, and it didn't help him, didn't make him better. And you look at Pep, and he's lost talented number twos on his, talented assistant coaches who are now managers in their own right. You've got Juan Malilo there, who's a brilliant sort of sounding board, thinking about the game, but not that sort of young, thrusting, challenging number two that Arteta would have been, for example. And then you look at the changes in the background that I talked about with Viana coming in and Cheeky going. Viana will have to come in and establish himself. He doesn't come in with power. So it is, I think they do need something to help him, undoubtedly. And they need, I don't know. The thing, you mentioned Fergie, right? The thing that Fergie would never let things get to this point. He saw signs and he rebuilt ahead and he got rid of big players. And when he was bringing in young players, he was also making sure there was... But he'd built and built and built in his career, and Pep hasn't had to do that. I don't know. I just don't know what roadmap Pep's using. That's the point I'm making.
I think that's important. I think that is an important point. I think, my instinct is that this is going to take longer for City to return to the summit of English and European football than Pep Guardiola's 2-year contract. So that raises the question of whether he will see that out, because, as Johnny said, he's not going to want to continue watching sort of mediocrity in relative terms. Maybe something in the background to shake things up would be a help. Just as an aside, I'm absolutely fascinated every time the camera cuts to the dugout and you see his sort of philosophical conversations with Juan Malilo, just like they're sitting in a cafe sometimes, not even watching the game, leaning back in the big dugout, comfy sofas, waving their hands, going, what is this? And they go, well, if he'd done this,
it'd make
go
a great,
for 5 minutes.
It'd make a great sketch, wouldn't it?
Nutmeg, that's interesting, isn't it, Pep?
It'd make a good kind of overdub sketch. Have you seen the new Severance is out yet? Oh man, I can't believe that cliffhanger from the last series. Yeah. But I mean, do you agree with Johnny then about needing some other help, as well as you saying that this is going to take longer? If it is going to be Pep who takes them back to the top,
I don't know. I mean, the help around him's always been important, but crikey, it's always been the Pep Guardiola show. Yeah. But his chef as well. So
that's kind of my point. Is it now he's so out on his own that he's made it too hard to help himself in a way?
I don't know. I think fundamentally the real problem is City squad. I don't think you can point the finger at Pep Guardiola. Really, I think whether he's been part of the failure to plan ahead properly, we're seeing a sort of crumbling of the empire a little bit. It's going to be rebuilt. They're too big and powerful for it not to be. I think fundamentally the problem is with the squad, and it's the aging. A lot of players aging at the same time. Some kind of not quite of the same stature, ready to step up and fill those shoes in terms of personality and like consistency and performance levels. And also just the kind of, it's been such a long time together, and the feeling that it's the end of a journey for this group.
Because while you're waiting to rebuild, De Bruyne goes, Diaz gets older, Stones gets older, Rodri gets older. To put it another way, for them to be back in the next 2 years, on top of the young signings they've made, you need to see like a big central defender coming in and probably a big midfielder.
Yeah, interesting times ahead of Manchester City. Gregor, you said the real problem. I'd actually argue the real problem is that kit and the font.
Oh my God.
Agreed.
I mean, forget Pep Guardiola. I mean, forget the, implosions on the pitch. It's abysmal, isn't it? Like, honestly, they deserve to be knocked out for that. The font, it bothers me as well for Omar Mamouche, and everyone's holding up their shirts with this ridiculous cartoon Comic Sans font. I'm so angry about it. It's so annoying, honestly. Anyway, the Game Podcast bringing you the real issues that matter in football. But as I mentioned in amongst that intro, Manchester City on the verge of going out. PSG, as you say, Gregor, in 22nd. It's all very exciting. Do we love this new format of the Champions League? That's the big question. I asked that because I've mentioned it quite a few times. Big group of pals, all love football. WhatsApp groups. It's a good sounding board for the kind of moodometer of things in football. And the comments start flying in this round of fixtures. Good fun, this new format, isn't it? Johnny, thoughts?
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, reluctantly.
To be fair.
Yeah, to be fair.
To be fair to UEFA, they've done well.
Yeah, I mean, look, because this was match day 7, and there was still something to play for I think pretty much every team except for maybe young boys. Even Liverpool at the top still had to win their game to be 100% sure. So that's pretty good, because the old Champions League format where we used to seeing certain groups were done after 4 games, and then you had the dead rubbers. And then we've got this mayhem on next Wednesday where everyone's playing. Don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Our City going to edge ahead of Stuttgart and blah, blah, blah. And even the teams, I watched Celtic last night, actually, and that was incredible for them to go through automatically. But then they, at the moment, they're, I think, due to play either Real Madrid or Bayern. So they kind of they could really do with at least a point against Aston Villa to go up the rankings. So they've still got something to play for. Yeah. It's going to be...
And Aston Villa, of course, who've got something to play for. We've got mentioned them in the second half of the show. But Bayer Leverkusen currently in 8th in that final kind of top section of the table. But then they're on the same number of points as Villa, Monaco, Feyenoord, Lille and Brest. I mean, it's pretty exciting.
Should City still have a chance, having won 2 of their 7 games?
So here we go, anti-format. This is all right. This is good.
We can see, yes. This is good. Look, there's 2 sides to this. One is they've made it incredibly easy for the big clubs not to fail.
Right.
Like that's obvious.
Fair point.
That basically was the reason for it.
Yeah.
And then the counter argument to that is, yes, for smaller clubs, of which I'll include Celtic, it's made it exciting and it's given them more opportunity. Celtic were hammered 7-1 by Dortmund. They didn't have to play them again. Phew. And then, they had a pretty favourable draw. And they've gone 5 games unbeaten, and it's like suddenly the wind's in their sails. You mentioned Brest, yeah. So it's been good for the smaller clubs. It's given them a better chance. But the counter to that is...
come on, you're Mr. Smart.
The big clubs weren't failing anyway, though. I mean...
they should be allowed to fail.
They should be allowed... No, you're right. City are proving that you have to be really, really seriously awful to go out. I do take that point. But I think we'd kind of got to that stage anyway where... Every group, you get the odd group that would have 3 good teams in it, but nearly every group, there were 2 teams that were going to go through, and it was sort of done by match day 4. I mean, look, maybe a Swiss system, but with more jeopardy would, that might be even better if it was
chop a couple of games out.
Yeah, well, if we went straight to round of 16,
if
we went straight to round of 16, then this would be incredible, wouldn't it?
That's the other thing, though. Let's not forget that this has added another 2 games to the
Yes.
picture. So some people will be pleased about that. Others,
yes,
including the players, not.
Yeah,
so.
as you say, Johnny, as it stands, we'd be looking at, if with the table currently is at the minute, projections from Opta were suggesting that Juventus against Celtic, Bayern against Real Madrid, Sporting against Stuttgart, Aston Villa against Monaco, Benfica against PSG. These are all before we get into games of Arsenal against Inter Milan or things like that. Could be pretty exciting. Gregor, Johnny mentioned it there, Celtic's achievement in this performance. Obviously, you're kind of saying, lost to Dortmund and things, but still pretty good from Brendan Rodgers' side to be in this position, to have put themselves in this position now.
More than pretty good.
You talked it down, mate. I didn't know how excited we were getting.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah, you should say again the draw was pretty favourable, and but although there were some unexpected results too, getting a draw against Atalanta. There's been some really good performances, particularly at Parkhead. It's first clubs like Celtic. It has opened a kind of another window of opportunity. It's not quite such a kind of macabre feeling going into it when you're going away and getting thrashed by PSG and Barcelona and all these teams, because that's who we're often getting drawn against because of the season. So it has been good for the small clubs. I'm not doubting that. And Celtic are not a small club, I should say.
I was going to say you could
one of the
RIP your mentions.
one of the lesser seeded clubs.
Yes, lesser seeded. Very well put.